Hello.
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 Welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of Inside the Rookery. Today I'm joined by, two of my fellow Rooks, Andy Leask and Mark Gibbons, with a big get well message for Andy Law, who's not very well, hence why I'm sitting in the big boss chair. Today we're joined by Gav Thorpe to talk about his career, his writing, his Patreon, amongst other things. Please do go and check that out. We'll be asking Gav about that later. And before we begin proper, let me just remind you, you have 1 week left to sign up for our Patreon and get the Mother Hoarfrost PDF as a winter gift. So please hurry on down and do that. Gav, welcome to Inside the Rookery, where we go behind the scenes with our favourite creators from tabletop games, video games, all things gaming. How are you this evening?
I am good, thank you. Yes, lovely to be here. Nice to meet you.
Excellent.
And looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Do you want to share a little bit of potted history of Gav, or do you want me to go straight into the question? Because little hinter, the first question might go back in time a bit.
I like the idea of potted. Can we get some potted Gav for sure?
Potted Gav. Yes, yeah. The very quick version is I joined Games Workshop Design Studio as an assistant games developer in 1993, so long time ago. And I worked at Games Workshop as a games developer and staff writer and designer and stuff in various capacities for 14 years, including a time as with the brilliant title of Warhammer Loremaster, which was in not necessarily overall control, but particularly running the game system and background and stuff of the Warhammer game. And then overlapping that and up to the present day, I've also been a writer since 1998, starting writing fiction when Black Library launched, 97 maybe, when Black Library launched when Games Workshop launched their Black Library imprint, and then since then I've also written original fiction and things, and that's mostly what I do. I left Games Workshop in 2007, and I've been a freelance pirate ever since, writing for Black Library, writing original fantasy series, scripts for video games, tabletop backgrounds, tabletop game design, all kinds of stuff. So, keeping myself busy and doing lots of different things, which is fun.
What a title. I presume that's Warhammer Loremaster. That was a pretty cool title.
It was, yes. Yeah. That was one of the conditions of getting the job, was getting to choose my own job title.
Oh, really?
That's awesome.
So Chambers was the Overfiend.
The 40k Overfiend, yeah, and Alessio on Lord of the Rings was the Ring Bearer.
Of course.
So we had Loremaster, Ring Bearer, and Loremaster, and Overfiend. Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
As always, we've had questions pre-submitted by our patrons and our Discord community. And as always, I'll be bringing them up from the chat and bringing any extra questions in from the chat. So please do share your thoughts there. But the first question is from Roderick. It's a classic careers question. If you could go back in time and give one piece of professional advice to Teen Gav before setting out on the interesting path you followed, what would it be?
That's a tricky one because there's not really particularly many big regrets or anything, or you should have done this professionally. You know, I've been lucky enough to have had opportunities that I've been able to take in all sorts of things. So I would say actually, I would just probably say, give yourself a bit more time. Don't fret about stuff quite so much, particularly when I was younger. It's like, don't be quite so intense about stuff. I'm a bit more laid back now, but certainly there was a period when I was creatively burning the candle at both ends and doing all kinds of stuff all at the same time, which kind of, I think, was one of the things which wasn't so great, working full time and doing creative stuff in your spare time and stuff like that. So, but that's about it really. I mean, because as I say, I've had a fairly blessed, privileged career to get to work with some great people at some great places and stuff like that. So it's like, don't work with them, or make the most of it, because I feel hopefully that I've tried to make the most of the opportunity that I've had already. So yeah, but I probably have a lot more personal than professional advice for teenage me, to be fair. But we won't go into that.
What about Mark and Andy? What advice would you have for Teen Gav? No, I'm joking. What advice would you have for yourself?
For me, I think probably stay in school. because I dropped out. Don't just do 2 weeks in art college and then leave. And then, as a 19-year-old, like hawking my portfolio around Cardiff trying to find work was probably not the best way to get into the business. I think had I stayed at art college, had I done my foundation and then a degree, I think I'd have been better equipped as a professional. It would propel me along the road a little bit faster. I still have great gaps in my understanding of fundamentals of art and design because I sort of learned enough as I was going along. So there's still things if I get asked to do today that give me the fear, which is part of the reason that Rookery has been so good is that I don't want to draw it. I don't have to draw it. I'll say, no, can we reimagine this? Because I was just complaining this week about all the hands I'm having to draw because hands are tricky. All them fingers and stuff. I said, can we do a thing with mittens or everybody's got flippers at some point down the line?
It's the thing where everyone's got 100 rocks because feet are difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, they just fade off into the mist. It's very misty.
I did that a lot when I was 14. Lots of people standing behind clouds.
Can everybody have their hands in their pockets, please?
Aster says it worked for you, having gone to art school. I'm not getting anywhere so far.
Oh,
there's always time, Aster.
Yeah, I think I said before, going to Games Workshop was a great apprenticeship because I felt like I got on-the-job training.
I'm the same. It's like I had to reset my English GCSEs twice. I'm told I wouldn't be a writer for a living, which was funny by my English teacher. I didn't even do English at A level. I was more focused. I won't go into long version, but I was more focused on doing art then as well. But similarly, I do feel that maybe. I suppose I don't necessarily have an academic or a grounding. I'm very much self-taught and taught by, like Games Workshop, people like Rick and Andy and Jervis, and although it was an apprenticeship rather than an academic learning of writing and stuff. So, and Mark Gascoigne as editor as well was very good in that regard. But so I do feel, sometimes it's like, but I don't know really what I'm doing. I know what, and it's very hard to explain to people and give advice to people sometimes as well because I don't have the terminology, the language to express. I know how to do it, but I can't. It's like if it's anything more complicated than saying don't use so many adjectives, then I kind of struggle because I don't have that framework, I suppose. So, I never wanted to go to university particularly, so I don't feel I've missed out necessarily, but maybe if I've been able to add it onto all the other stuff I did anyway. That would have been useful.
Right.
The Scottish school curriculum is funny. Just when you're saying you can't explain it to people. So I was getting Norwegian lessons and like my friends in England who have kids are like learning what fronted adverbials are and stuff. And in Scotland, like we weren't really taught grammar. We were just taught like English. I don't really know how to explain it. And my Norwegian teacher was like, so this is a modal verb. Do you know what that is? And I'm like, no. I mean, but when I see it, I know what it is. Like I can use it perfectly correctly.
Yes. So. It's absolutely that. It's interesting because Sammy's my son, so he's 8, so he's getting right into that fronted adverbial and all this kind of stuff. And I'm trying very hard not to kind of interfere with that and say like, no, don't write like that. That's terrible writing because I understand why they're learning the things. But I think as much as it's a bit weird about learning English, it does give you a toolkit to then learn other languages a bit more usefully and So it's a strange one because on the one side, the reasons they're doing it is a bit weird because it's like this was brought in by people who like learn Latin at private school and all that kind of stuff. But actually, knowing some of this stuff isn't actually terrible either. If you do go on to whether you need to know it at 8, not quite so sure. But knowledge is a dangerous thing.
I studied Latin. I won the Latin prize. There was only 2 of us in the class, so not my best achievement. But the person I did Latin with is now working for the Catholic Church as like an archivist. So I guess he's the loser, not me. But like I knew all about nominative and accusative and genitive case in Latin, but no one ever talked to us about that in English. And there's a lot of chat in the chat about learning language. And Andy Lee Roderick thinks you'd like to come in because maybe you've got something to say on this matter.
Well, as an English teacher, but no, I agree. I mean, what I will say, just to reassure you about your own son's learning, he doesn't need to know about fronted adverbials. That is one of the examples of people looked at the new GC, because unfortunately my school currently teaches GCSE, even though we're up in Scotland. Hopefully not for much longer. But there's a bullet point where they need subject terminology, and that has been misinterpreted as that level of.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah.
If they can call a metaphor or a simile or repetition, that's the level that they need. Like it doesn't need, and that's at GCSE when they're at like 15, 16.
So we were joking in email before this that we might end up talking about composting and Hugo cultures, and actually we've ended talking about the comparative difference between the Scottish and English language curriculum.
That's
so there we go.
But again, it's one of those where I try not, especially when we're doing homeschooling during the pandemic and stuff like that, or during lockdown, because you'd be getting lots of stuff, and it'd be like, and there's certain assumptions, because there's quite binary answers to stuff. It's like, pick the correct one out of these 4, and you're like, actually 3 of those are right. You're talking about a style guide, but unfortunately, that's not the way stuff's being taught necessarily, especially when particularly with like Oxford commas and all that kind of stuff, where you're like, no, you can't say that's wrong. That's not wrong. You're just, But there's whole podcast about prescriptive grammarians, all the rest of it. We don't have to get into that. But let's do some. Let's talk about games and stuff.
Let's talk about toy soldiers and stories.
We could get you to come back. We could do it beside the Rookery special. On grammar.
Or there should be absolutely. Or should invent a game system which has got sort of like front rank adverbials or something like that, where it's kind of.
Quickly, let's move on to the next
grammar
question.
Police. Sorry.
You see what I did there? Seagoat asks, what was your favourite novel, game system, CRPG that you worked on?
So my favourite project of anything really was Inquisitor at Games Workshop, which was the 54mm narrative skirmish game that I wrote, and it was. As a project, it was just brilliant. There was lots of enthusiasm. But essentially, it's very much role-playing with miniatures, really, the idea. And it harks back to a very old style of wargaming. Jervis brought me in sort of old 54mm Wild West skirmish rulebooks that he had and all kinds of stuff. But what I particularly liked about it was, one, it really delved into the themes and particularly the imagery of 40k in a way that the battle game never has. And creating these one-off characters and stuff like that, and working with John Blanche and Rick and the artists in the studio and the sculptors and stuff like that, not just to say, like, come up with units in an army, but to add this whole layer, this whole belly of the Imperium around the idea of the Inquisition and the backstory and coming up with stuff. And there was just a real energy about it. And Karl Kopinski, Steph Kopinski doing the graphics on the book, which was amazing. Just one of the best looking books Workshop's ever produced. There was lots of hobby and people converting models and all that kind of stuff. So, and it was very much because I'm much more of a storyteller, narrative gamer rather than hardcore kind of tournament player and stuff as well. So it was very much in my wheelhouse, as you might say. So yeah, it was just a lot of fun, but also just its legacy in 40k as a secondary game system continues to this day. Most of the things we created for that game, of one way or the other, they made it into the role playing games, or they made it back into the battle game, or they're fairly major parts of the fiction and the background now. And obviously, I mean, we created loads of stuff over 14 years and all the rest of it, but that's one of the things people still ask me about as much now. They don't really necessarily ask as much about, that 3rd edition Eldar Codex or whatever, but Inquisitor was the thing. I think people of a certain time that were there into Workshop hang on me and my time there. That was it.
Was there a lot of debate, a lot of gnashing of teeth over making it 54mm? Was there pushback? Well, we should make it 28 so people can use these miniatures in their other games, or was that like, no, it's its own thing?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, that was the only bit about that really was because, again, the upper management, Rick, and that they were very keen to do a very specific miniatures, sort of like collectibles, painters miniatures, larger scale, and absolutely the whole point was that there wasn't any overlap really with the battle game, apart from the fact we would be stupid not to make a Space Marine, so we can come out with context and make a Space Marine there as well. There wasn't really any problem with that. The reality of it, though, of like basically we had a range of 15 miniatures to launch with, which was cool, but these were full metal models, and so coming up not only with like coming up with a backstory and a context basically, so people could collect most of those models with each other. There were three inquisitors, so you could collect war bands, and they were kind of themed to each inquisitor. But actually, if you wanted this inquisitor with these guys or converted or whatever, you could mix and match because they were very much like role-playing characters. You could create your own. But actually, what I look at what they can do now with plastic kits and parts and stuff like that. Have your time again and be able to make all of those miniatures, but with like 10 different arms and heads and and all that kind of stuff, and it would be amazing. But also, but it's still, but also not quite the point, because the converting and the modeling side of it was very much, the style of it was very much going back to that kind of old school gaming of like chopping heads off yourself and swapping and things. So there was a few little kind of kits and alternative stuff done. But plastic's just so much easier to model with. So even if there wasn't necessarily kits as such, just being able to chop stuff about and things would have been
plastic's amazing. People complain about a lot of these new workshop kits are so monopose, and I said but once you put the miniature together, you take a little hacksaw to it, you just you're chopping off bits and repositioning them and swapping bits out anyway. It's not quite as convenient as it used to be, but still, like, no, if I want to change that orc's arm or that pose or that weapon, I'll just build it first and then chop it up.
Yes. Yeah. Well, exactly. There's different ways. These days the approach is each one is literally a sculpture. It's like it's a beautiful piece of miniature art. But there's still because it's plastic. It's like it's a godsend, really. For those of us that have gone through junior hacksaws and scalpel blades, and just got ourselves covered in mini part. Absolutely. So
still got the scars. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So
just a bit of a pivot to now. We've all worked as writers on Wifrip, but only one of us on the stream has been the lore master. So from Vicky the GM, question for anyone who wants it. A friend of mine and I were arguing Warhammer lore, go figure, and he vehemently denies that Wifrip is canon. I presume that means his friend believes that Warhammer Fantasy Battle, there is a canon, but believes that the battle is the canon and Wifrip isn't. Can I get it on record that it is?
Kinda.
Of course you can.
It's like there is no canon, right? That's the issue, I think, and that's what people have to understand. And for some people, that's really quite difficult to get their heads around, because they want a definitive Warhammer world and a definitive 40k galaxy and whatever it might be. But the thing is, it's just changed so much. It's like 40 years old now and counting, and all those iterations and things. So, it's like, which version of Wifrip are you talking about? The latest one, the one that's just come out, which is obviously far more up to date, with lots of Storm of Chaos stuff that we did and all the rest of it and things like that. Or the first edition one, which had like lots of bad puns about Bernabeu Stadium and, and stuff like that, and everything in between. So you go, there's not even a canon of Wifrip. Mm-hmm. Never mind the whole Warhammer world. So the way I always try and approach it is, World War II was a thing that happened. There is a reality, a truth of the Warhammer world or the 40k set that exists in abstract somewhere. And we basically create iterations of that. So it's like, I can write a book set in World War II, but it doesn't define what World War II is or was and stuff. It's just the way I look at a piece of it, and somebody can write about exactly the same thing and come up with a slightly different interpretation. So there are certain facts. The Emperor is this person, Sigmar is this, Emperor Karl Franz is this person, so quickly, and the current leader of the Ultramarines is Marneus Calgar. These are facts that have been established, but actually, lots of it is so much more mutable than that, because they're always designed to be a setting that you could create your own stuff in. You can't, they won't ever name all 1,000 Space Marine chapters, because they want you to be able to create your own chapter and your own color scheme and all the rest of it stuff and everything. So and it doesn't matter how much you write and how many books come out and credits and stuff. It's a galaxy of 10,000 years and a million worlds. That's the whole point, or the whole of the Warhammer world and history and stuff. So there is no such thing as a definitive version of it. There's only layers of what you choose to accept and what fits with your vision, and a little bit of who designed it. The closer to the center it is, the more that's likely to be an iteration that is the vision of Games Workshop, the entity, not even necessarily an individual. It's like the Warhammer Army books that we produced were pretty definitive, but then they only go into part of the Warhammer world. They don't, we could write about, a book about the High Elves, but then Bill King can write a series of novels which add immense amounts of depth and character to those books because they're dealing with it in a different way. And it's like, well, is that true? To go, well, it is true until I wrote some about the Sundering and did something different, or somebody else writes about Tyrion, or, so, and none of them are not true. How many books have been written about King Arthur? Which one's true? All of them? None of them? It's the same idea.
Do you know, it actually came up on our Discord this week because we were talking about beastmen, gores and ungores, and how they would have female gores, right? And they'd have their little herds and they'd have their little babies. It's not in the battle. It's not in the army book because why would it need to be? But it is in one of Bill King's novels, in one of the Slayers, Troll Slayer was it? Where it just like has a random offhand comment about how the female gores are like gentler than the male ones and you don't usually see them. And like it wouldn't ever need to be in an army book. So
that's the thing. And as a writer, going to the whole, actually as a writer thing, one of the things I sort of try to say as well is you're not writing to an army list. I mean, it's there. And it's like, yes, the Space Marine Tactical Squad has access to these things, or Intercessor Squad, or whichever version of it you want to be. But that doesn't mean that a Space Marine never picks up a different gun if he finds one, or that you can't, you're not writing fixed by the rules themselves. Because again, people get very literal about the rules. No, the rules themselves are just another iteration of that reality. But the reality again that you're tapping into as an artist or as a writer or something is something else. The best one is always the debate every time is like, do bolt shells have casings? And I'm sure Mark's done a fair few pictures of casings coming outside of a bolt because it looks cool. But the description just said, these are 0.5 caliber, 0.50 caliber caseless ammunition. You go, well, they obviously did look at the pictures, it might be one way or the other.
Well, you've pleased Figgy, so that's clearly, you are right because it's everyone's game, so everyone's right.
Yeah.
I know that Andy Law, when he was working on 4th edition, so Oxecutor says 4th edition Wifrip has done a lot to try and reconcile the differences between editions of both Fantasy Battle and Wifrip. And Andy Law, out of all the people I have ever met, is like an encyclopedia of knowledge and really tries to reconcile the differences in ways that make sense. Can confirm.
Yeah,
we often have long chats about it.
Yes, I mean, one of the interesting things, which Graham will talk about a bit more necessarily, but when Rick did the Empire Army, the 4th edition Warhammer Empire Army book, he made a kind of conscious decision to try and just kind of neaten everything up because, of course, Wifrip was very baroque and arcane and they had all these in-jokes and stuff, and so he played a lot of that down for the army book and took out quite a lot of the jokes and put other jokes in because it was Rick's. But so that before then there was just Warhammer, I think. The Warhammer Fantasy Battles background and the Wifrip background were just the same. In fact, most of the background was in Wifrip because there wasn't really that much for Warhammer. But when 4th edition, the box set came out and the first army books came out, these were kind of like slightly stripped down and sort of like slightly, I don't want to say simplified because that's not quite fair, but they were just more, they were summarized versions. And that's kind of where the divide sort of started happening, really.
It's like a higher level, isn't it? It's how zoomed in you are to the details.
Yeah. But yeah, and then there's just certain things which he didn't like, and so he decided I'm writing it now, so I can disagree, and I'm going to ignore that. in a similar kind of way. But my take is that unless something's been directly contradicted, it's been written in black and white on a page somewhere that says this is no longer true, then it can be true if you wanted to. It doesn't matter how far back you go; that thing can be true. If it hasn't said no, actually this thing does not exist anymore, then it might as well.
And one of the clever things that I know we did in 4th edition, and I'm pretty sure Andy did it back in 2nd edition as well, was including things as like in-world artifacts. Mm-hmm. So it's on a map, but it's a map that a character has drawn. So therefore, it might be inaccurate because the character might be wrong. Or
plausible deniability.
Exactly. Like somebody in the world believes that that's what happened, and here they've written a letter explaining that that's what happened.
Yeah.
But if that turns out not to be true, that's okay. That guy was just wrong. That's quite a clever way of having your cake and eating it. So.
Same thing happens with the miniatures. You get asked, well, why does the art and the miniatures, why don't they look the same? And I said, well, this is the artist's interpretation of the real thing. The miniature is a sculptor's interpretation of the real thing. The real thing might be neither of those, in fact,
Yeah.
Which really goes back to we should all study Plato.
So there is some ancient Greek references later, but I'm going to move away from Warhammer for a bit, but we will come back. There are plenty more questions on this and talk about you, Gav. So Seagoat would like to know, I mean, Seagoat's really asking the tough questions. What are you focusing on now? And why should we as fans get involved with your creations?
I'm sure Seagoat means that in a more supportive way.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What things shall I tell my friends? Mostly, mostly it's still writing, as in like writing fiction. I'm in a little bit of I would say a fallow period, but actually a deliberately fallow period. Not wholly due to the pandemic and stuff like that, but things have slowed down and I've deliberately not sped them up a bit. So I'm not really working on lots of things at the moment, particularly. There's a series of games I've been writing with Andy Chambers for Warlord based on their 2000 AD license, which we've been having a lot of fun with. The next one, so the first one we did was Strontium Dog, which was a lot of fun. Then he did one with his friend Roger Garish, which was the Judge Dredd one. I didn't really have the time to do it then. Then the next one we've done is Slain, which they're kind of working on, is out soon. I think is Knowledge, and then we've just finished working on another one now. I'm also working on some other tabletop stuff with Andy, which is all like ND aid and stuff. But that's kind of really cool. I'm doing like well designed for that, so that's just like being paid to make up stuff, which is the best thing ever. Yeah. Just like come up with names for these things and come up with fake histories and all that kind of stuff. And then I've got some other sort of like non-Black Library novel writing stuff, which again is in the works, hopefully, and maybe get picked up by a publisher or something. But again, isn't anything people can direct to. So it's the thing. There's always that delay of like, hey, this cool thing. You're like, I did that 2 years ago, and I'm really glad you're excited. But the thing I'm doing now is out in another. I mean, some of these projects might be 2, 3. Maybe longer years before they bear fruit. I've been doing some video games work, but again, that's stuff that I can't talk about and it's not been renounced yet and all that kind of stuff. So really the best thing is just to follow me on Twitter at Gav Thorpe Create. That's the only social media. I'm sort of on Instagram and stuff. The only thing I want to bother with is Twitter. I'm not on Facebook because it's horrible. And the Patreon, which we did keep talking about. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do with the Patreon is say I'm doing I've just started a how to plan your novel kind of course, series of workshops, exercises type thing, which is which started because I've been mentoring one of the younger Black Library authors recently over the last 6 months or so, and she found it really useful and wrote loads of notes. So I've basically stole her notes of the stuff I've been helping her with, because she was trying to make the transition from short stories to novels. So she had loads of ideas and things, but didn't know how to, and to be fair, like we were saying earlier, I didn't know how to do that with my first novel. My first novel, 13th Legion, Cheats, is basically about 10,000 word-ish short stories and a novella. It's not structured like a novel because I didn't know how to write a novel or structure a novel. So I just written short stories and stuff as well. So it's interesting. One of those. It's like, oh, right, okay. So people might find that useful. And then
they clearly will, because the big is that you, Bastian? Just that's Bastian. Gav, when you have a project, how do you start? What is your process? Also, a big fan. So clearly, people do have an appetite for how to plan your novel. A novel by Gav Thorpe.
That's the thing. Yeah.
And in your defence as well, like Irvin Welsh's novel Trainspotting is essentially just a bunch of short stories as well. I think there's a long established tradition of beginning that way.
Absolutely. It's just whether you know how to do if you know how to divide stuff into chapters or not. I didn't, so they're just very long chapters. How do I start? It depends really. That's kind of like a whole thing in itself. But usually I'm quite visual based. I start with imagery really and stuff, which is obviously why the miniatures and stuff and it's always appealed so much. And also it depends what I'm doing. Because, for instance, with a Black Library project, there's two ways. It might be something that I've proposed and they've chatted about and they've put on the schedule, and it's say like The Last Chances and some of the Warhammer novels and things like that. Or it might be more like the Horus Heresy series, where you're part of this massive ongoing narrative and writers' rooms, and that's very different. So there isn't necessarily one way to start a process, I suppose. For my own stuff, it's kind of like it starts when I think I've got like a character or something that is interesting. There's something that gets its hook into me, and I start thinking, "Oh, that'd be kind of cool." And it's like I say, it's quite visual often to see a character in a position, or imagining them delivering a line of dialogue, or interacting with some other people, or something like that. And I start thinking, "Oh, who are they? And what's their story? What's the setting?" I try to do quite character-based stuff. But interestingly, it's one of the reasons I'm winding back my commitments. I'm in the fortunate position that I can do that. Is I'm trying to find some of this stuff out again, because so much of my work is commissioned. It's like somebody comes up and says, "We've got this. We've got this much of a script treatment, or we've got this idea for this video game. We need to turn it into a script treatment and then a script." So I don't start the process. Mostly what I'm very good at doing is answering other people's questions about how to do something, or how does this fit together, or we want. A good example is I did work on a video game called For Honor. Well, it will eventually be called For Honor, which basically is like a big sword fighting game. But the premise that they came to me with was like, we need to create a world. It's kind of set on medieval times, but essentially we need to justify Vikings fighting knights fighting samurai, and that was it. Which was like. Cool. Okay. And that was another brilliant project, amazing people to work with. But yeah, and so there's usually a question posed that I answer. I suppose, and it's how do you come up with that question? So that question might be, who is this person, or what is this setting, or why do I keep hearing explosions? Yeah. So and then I tend to kind of fluff about for a while, just kind of being quite, like going for walks in the park and thinking about stuff while I'm washing up, and maybe making notes and stuff. And I reach a certain critical mass when maybe I'll start writing a bit, but quite often, and again, this is kind of probably just been ingrained into me, like with the jobs that I do and stuff. It's like I then come up with a plan, and it might not be necessarily a very detailed plan, but I kind of come up with the arc. What is the story? Yeah, so I usually think, and I start thinking about the end point. What's this about? What's this building to? What's the final scene, or whatever it is that's going to be cool. Which is kind of cool for writing like a novel or a trilogy and stuff, but it's not great for creating franchises. I compare, like, if I look at like what Dan Abnett has done, for example, with Gaunt's Ghost, because he comes from comics, so there's always another chapter. He's very good at just taking a thing and carrying on with it. Whereas I'm like, no, I finished writing that. No, I told that story. I don't want. It's like, what do you mean a sequel? No, there isn't. Did you not notice like half of them are dead at the end and nobody's happy and all the rest of it? So I don't think necessarily in terms of just continuous storytelling. I think in terms of an arc that I want to take with a character, and then it's completed because I've told their story and they've gone through and they've been redeemed, or they've died, or they've made their sacrifice, or whatever. To go, oh yeah, well, I want more stories about him, but I've told the story. It's like I'd be terrible at writing Spider-Man, because I'd be like, no, I've written my Spider-Man story. No, he did that, and he did it, and he saved the guy, and he swung, and he did the Spider-Man thing, and he showed that great power, great responsibility, blah blah. You're like, yeah, well, another one. Go, but I did it. I don't want to write that story again.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then I do end up, writing the same stories all over again. I write about power, authority, and identity. I've realised they're the things that always end up being key kind of themes, whether I know it or not. And I'll go back and I'll do something different this time, and I'll go back and look at, oh god, that story's just about identity still, isn't it? I thought I was doing about technology and intrusion on modern life, but it's not. It's about identity still. So they're obviously my hang-ups.
Well, Tilda Chandra has asked, what have you not created for that you would like to? But maybe what have you not yet written about that you would like to?
Yeah.
That's not power, authority, and identity. Or maybe that really works well for you.
Well, funny talking about that, because the one thing, like, because having worked with Warhammer and 40k and the Games Workshop stuff for so long, which was obviously a major plank of my teenage years and hobby and stuff, and the other one was 2000 AD, and I'd love. And I'd say doing the 2000 AD stuff with Andy and the license is kind of cool in the wargaming sense and stuff, but if there's another IP I'd like to work with, it's Dread or Stronty Dog or Rogue Trooper, or because again, they're the bits that are in my core hobby geek DNA. Bearing in mind I'm not going to write a sequel to Lord of the Rings or anything like that. So, but that's a very different proposition. Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to. So that's the one I don't think there's any realistic goal of that happening, or maybe there is. Maybe that's one of the things I would like to do. So that would be my wish list thing of like, oh, cool, if you could work on anything, if I could click my fingers and write a 6-part Dread story, that'd be awesome. But it doesn't work that way, especially for 2080. But everything else, I don't have. I think because I am professionally enthusiastic, I suppose is the best way to put it. It's like with Warhammer, it's like you don't get to pick and choose what you work on. You go, we did dwarfs. Dwarfs come up, so you go, well, I'm a big fan of Warhammer dwarfs and dwarfs in general and stuff like that. But it's like whatever comes along, you find what interests you in that. And because you have to find out, go, well, this bit's cool. I'm going to look at this bit and I'm going to build on this, and I'm become a fan of this thing, because you have to be to create for it. You have to engage with it if you hope other people are going to engage with it. So you find the angle that appeals to you, or that you want to write about or build on. So it doesn't matter. I don't think about what's already existing and I want to write for that. Although it'd be nice to write some more Eldar stuff for 40K as well. But
actually, I'll ask a different question then, just on that note, because we do have one somewhere. Where is it? Roderick, you asked it. Here we go. Given the fact that you were the first Black Library author to really tackle alien mindsets with your Eldar novels, what tips would you have for GMs running games with Eldar or with Elven NPCs or PCs?
So the go-to for Eldar, and not quite the same extent for the elves, is to remember they're all hormone-riddled teenagers. Everything's dialed up to 11. So you think everything is the most important thing in the world. Like being the coolest is the most important thing in the world. Being what you wear, what you're into, every disaster, every up and down is the most major thing in the world. Yeah, if you can vaguely remember those days.
I can remember.
Some of us take quite long, but it is. It's like I am so jealous of my teenage self and the ability to be so enthusiastic and into stuff in a way I just can't do when now I'm in my late 40s.
I have a theory that the Twilight novels are not about vampires; they're about teenagers in love. And the only way she could get across how strongly the person in the Twilight novel would feel about the other person was to make him like this glow in the sun, like, or immortal, who's like nobody else she's ever met, because that's what it's like when you're a teenager. So they're not about vampires; they're just about teenagers. Everything's dialed up to 11.
No, absolutely, I agree with that. And that's what. But Eldar are like that all the time on everything. Everything's the best thing ever, the worst thing ever. Everything's a disaster. Everything's amazing. And that's why they have to. And the Craftworld Eldar, they've got this thing that they switch bits off, so they don't care about anything. They go full hipster on 90% of their life. From one thing to and learn how to deal with that. So they and that's the thing. It's like trying to we get to about identity. That the part of the Elder novels were very much about identity and how you shape identity and stuff. And the Elder have this amazing ability to literally recreate themselves again and again and again and build themselves up slowly over hundreds of years. So. But they're hyper focused on one thing at a time and deal with that. So, and to think of it not as the output, because like, oh, they're a warrior or they're a bone singer or it's like, no, what psychological aspect does doing that help them deal with, whether it's their creativity or mourning, or I invented, I came up with the idea of the path of service, where they're selfless. Because it was like, who clears away the trays in the canteen, kind of thing. Literally, there is, because they're like writing about aspect warriors and things. And it's like, what do they eat? And so I came up with this basic Craftworld canteen, and then Lindsay add some great feedback and made it even more like just weird. stuff. So actually, it wasn't just like trays of food and stuff like that, but the food was growing out of the floor, and you'd pick it and all this kind of stuff. So it was part orchard and farm and part canteen and stuff like that. But somebody still has to clear up all the crap and all the rest of it. And they don't, the Eldar don't do the whole kind of like lots of little robot servants or anything like that. They're not the town. So the path of service exists. That when you live in this post-scarcity, how would you organise a post-scarcity kind of environment and stuff like that? And so you go, that idea of being selfless for like a couple of 100 years to give yourself perspective, and actually being needed and kind of almost martyrs. So to do that, that's what you have to do. Is you go, it's not like, oh, he's a striking scorpion and therefore he's on the path of like sneaking up and shooting people and hitting them with a chainsaw. It's like, what's that inner anger that they're dealing with? What's their issue? Why are they on that path? Why have they been led to this part of their personality, and what are they trying to deal with? But at the same time, being an absolutely stroppy teenager.
Yeah, why does he not want to be seen? Why does he feel he needs to be invisible?
Why has he gone full emo? It's like,
I love
because
that.
that's it. And in the novels, it's because he got rejected by a girl. But
And Andy, Law, and I have talked about this, about a path that helps the Eldar come back from their paths when they've got too lost on their paths. Is that authority? And did you invent that, or is that just something we randomly come up with in our game?
I don't know. No, genuinely, I've made up a lot of stuff, and some of it I remember, and some of it is like, do I? Because you mentioned the name, and then I go, oh, that sounds familiar. Was that me? I don't know. So.
Because there's a question in the chat about authority. So Menelaus started out as Proto-Slanesh and Oldhammer, but I was asked recently about in the Sundering, where he appears alongside the Kithrai, apparently in place of authority as a proto-authority. Is that right?
Probably. As I mentioned just in the pre-chat, sort of, that the problem is that I'm not party to the decisions that were made, particularly during the end times and the creation of Age of Sigmar, and how things kind of moved from one and got reinterpreted and stuff. So I don't know if those were the deliberate connections that were made and stuff. And the Sithrai is an interesting one, because that's something that I made up right towards the end of my tenure at Games Workshop, when I redid the Dark Elf army book. And we wanted we had a look at just like the way the Eldar gods were presented was just a bit, and apparently Andy said it was me, right? Yeah, he gave me. Apparently I came up with the name for Necrons as well. I keep getting told by someone, but anyway. So the Sithrai was just like, again, it was to kind of contextualize the Elder Gods, and there was all this focus on like a couple of the gods that had been named and things, and this like it was trying to get back to that more classical roots of like, there wasn't just good and evil, there was just like this pantheon of gods, and some had an evil aspect and some had a more positive aspect to them, but you paid tribute to them in the Sithrai with these dark gods and all the rest of the stuff. And some of them were obviously based on real kind of like classical dark gods and Hades and all that kind of stuff. And that, I felt that was very important to kind of move, because so much fantasy stuff just disappears down a hole of kind of like pseudo Judeo-Christian theology, and doesn't understand how pantheistic beliefs actually work. They just have lots and lots of mono gods and stuff like that. So I was just trying to, but I didn't really get to explore that very much, because that was one of the last projects I did. And also I didn't really, this was something I created mostly in my own head, and some of it got written into a book, and some of it I kind of carried into the novels a little bit and stuff with mentions, but there wasn't any, I didn't get to write any massive like documents letting other people know what was going on.
Well, do you know, funnily enough,
that might be one of the ones I did write a briefing on, I think.
Well, we actually, Graham Davis did a masterclass for our patrons last week on how to create pantheons, and that's one of the very things we talked about, how the pantheons are interlinked, and you don't just worship one of them, and how they're not these monolithic deities. I was just interested in authority because I love the idea that they're all teenagers, and then you've got this one path who are dealing with the fact that they've been so teenage before, and they're going to help other people get through the teenage that they're doing.
Yes,
right now. I've always been a big authority fan.
The path of the mentor.
yeah.
But the path of the older. It's interesting. It's the older teenager, really. It's the older sibling potentially.
Exactly. It's path of the big sister. in our family, because we have 2 daughters, and the big sister is very much a big sister.
There was Sammy does climbing, and it was interesting. I noticed there was a girl about his age in the room, and then an older girl, probably about 12, came in for the next class, and this girl immediately gravitated towards her and started talking to her about stuff and saying, "Oh, I bet you're allowed to like go on sleepovers and stuff like that." And then interestingly, that girl, probably about 16, 17, came in about 2 minutes later, and then the 12-year-old gravitated to her straight away, and that. Just seeing that, and she didn't really necessarily. She was great with the 8-year-old up until an older girl was around for her to talk to. It was really fascinating just to sit there and see this, and it was like, "Oh, that's quite there's something going on there, isn't there?" Of like I said, the past of the big sister, of just like wanting to like, "Oh, what's it like being an older girl? I just want to know now." Yes.
So we've got a question that's come up in the chat, and there was a question pre-submitted that was basically along the same theme, and it was, can you talk about the project that you were going to do with Cubicle 7 with Warhammer Fantasy RPG 4th edition a few years back? If so, what was it going to be? And they're a big fan of your Black Library books.
Thank you for being a big fan of my Black Library books. Very, very briefly, because it got started up when I started it with Andy. As a co-project, which was it was a really cool, like, multi-part sort of like epic campaign, which was focused on some of the elements building up towards the end times and things like that. So it covered some of the stuff I'd created. It was a basic chance to revisit some of the stuff I'd done as Warhammer Loremaster in the original version of the End Times, for the other version of the End Times, which had stuff like Set on Albion and Mists of Albion and Ulthuan and the pen. So it's about the clock ticking towards midnight and stuff. So yeah, there was this big kind of like globe-trotting cool campaign adventure about the end of the world and stuff like that. And we kind of, I'd say, we got as far as the equivalent of a kind of treatment of the books and stuff, but then, for lots of reasons that their schedule changed and personnel changed and stuff, so it didn't happen in the end.
And was it going to be called The Paths of the Old Ones?
Paths of the Old Ones was the title, yeah. Which was going to be basically the MacGuffin for
how you got around the epic world.
And there's some really cool ideas. I mean, it's as a story and as an adventure, there's loads of really cool stuff that we were gonna do there. But yeah, one of those that didn't work out, unfortunately.
We've touched on the end times a few times, and Zoltan did have a question which he thought was controversial, but I guess it depends on the answer as to whether it's controversial. Here we go. The world that was, or the new world? I would, well, in a room with a gun to my head kind of stuff, then I would go with the World War I, just because I grew up with that, I worked with it and had so much charm to it and all the rest of it and stuff. However, where Age of Sigmar is now, having had some years of development, having had more background put into it, having had stuff worked on it, as opposed to where it was when it first came out, there's lots of stuff I really like about it. It's a very different beast. But there's a lot more subtlety and nuance and texture to it now. Because again, it's like, it feels like it was out 2 years ago, but it's in 3rd edition now. It's like 6-7 years, probably I'll probably say even longer. I don't know. That it's been out and stuff, and over that time, getting the battle tomes, getting out, what's gone from just what was a very abstract cosmic battle basically between Sigmar and Khorne, as far as the miniatures were concerned, which was what was available on release. It's like it's developed its own different textures. There's bits of it, because they've added in the lower levels. I think the thing is, all the big cosmic stuff is still there, but the thing that people are actually fighting for, as opposed to over, is there. I always compared it to like the Battle for New York. The Avengers fight the aliens, but actually nobody's living in New York, so it doesn't really matter. Who cares? Whereas actually, and that was how Age of Sigmar originally was, because it was this big, yes, we got the Stormcast and we're fighting back against. But the edict at the time was like, but nobody had survived. Everybody had either been killed or turned to chaos.
So it was so essentially we're just going to try and wipe out chaos, and then and then slowly we put in the little people that were still surviving, that were clinging on. The cities of Sigmar came back. So again, the texture, the cosmic stuff started to give way to again some of that slightly more grimdarky texture, I think. And so where it is now, and now it's more like 40k, I think, in that you've got this massive choice of stuff. The benefit Warhammer always had was a very defined world of there's Outdwarf, there's Middenheim. When it gets attacked, you can point to it on a map and it makes a difference. Whereas in 40k, you'd have to blow up a whole world for anyone to notice. And even then, it's only 1 of a million. You have to try and pretend it's important. Yeah. Armageddon, the biggest thing ever. It's army of one world. Who cares? It feels really important, and everyone fighting it's important. But actually, in the scheme of the Imperium, oh no, we lost our strategically important hive world. And so Age of Sigmar, you've got that again, that vastness, that cosmic, and you can set so much stuff in there. And now, because again, it's got some reality to it, so you can have a cool drama set in the streets of a city, or it's not just all about demigods fighting each other and throwing lightning bolts in each other's faces. So I think now, it's cool, and I'd like to try and write some more in there. There's not so much opportunity at the moment, but.
To begin with, it felt like, we were talking earlier about the army lists, right? It just felt like a set of armies, like a vehicle to sell models to fight each other.
Yes, there were armies, there was no cultures.
Yeah, who were they? Did they eat? Did they have relationships, societies?
It felt like madness to me at the time, because although I understood that Games Workshop needed to do something to reinvigorate the fantasy side of the 40k versus fantasy equation, this seemed like such an extreme move to throw the baby out with the bathwater like that, And again, distill it just down to it's just armies fighting over floating rocks in space. That's all it is now. But you had all this wonderful lore that you spent 30 years building. It's just gone. Now, as Gav said, over 6 years later, now they've been able to sort of build that sort of history, as comparatively short as it is in the Age of Sigmar, even if it's only 100 years of game world time, it still feels like it's got that depth and that richness. And then the miniatures have come along and just, now I see why you've done this. Your elves are not regular fantasy Tolkien elves anymore. Yeah. They're these the Lumineth and stuff, or the Deepkin. It's kind of like, oh wow, that's a whole original take on that. And I get now from a creative and a business point of view why that was important to do.
I was it's funny, I was in the Warhammer World store just a couple of days ago I picked up the Sylvaneth book for a potential future project. And I remember, because I wrote when the Sylvaneth were first coming out, and so and I wrote a short story for an anthology that was coming out, and it was all still very much work in progress. So I got sent the PowerPoint of the miniatures, the renders of the miniatures, and a copy of the battle tome, but loads of it was just magenta text, some kind of filler text and stuff. So it wasn't all done there. But even then, I just remember, and I saw the picture of Alarielle, the new queen, on the giant beetle, and I saw these cool new spirit things, and I just went, that's Age of Sigmar. That was the point when I went. That was the first for me. Obviously, the Stormcast were new and stuff, but that was the first proper Age of Sigmar miniatures. They weren't, because I went, right, I get it, okay. And there was enough texture there, and there was a society that these guys fought for, and it was still a little bit thin, I'll be honest. And again, they've done a new tone. There's more to it again, in the same way that actually it's weird, because if you went back to that 4th edition Empire book that Rick wrote, there's quite a lot there. But if you didn't realise there was all that stuff in Wolfrup and all that stuff on the side, it would have been just as similarly thin, really. You go, it's just a kind of a slightly fancy version of the Holy Roman Empire. Whoop-de-doo, But actually, even at the time, people were aware of the depth, but actually it was accessible. The Sylvaneth, the elves, I say, people keep asking me about the Dwardian and stuff, and I was historically I'm a big fan of the Warhammer Dwarfs and stuff, and they're kind of cool. They don't quite catch me like Warhammer Dwarfs. They're really nice, and the Slayers are cool, and making a whole army of Slayers and stuff like that. But they're not quite the same. There's lots of things I like, but it's for me, I'm so close to Dwarfs that I don't want Dwardian, and not that they shouldn't exist and what they've done is wrong, but they're not for me, So, but people naturally assume that I'd make that kind of transition. It's no, they're not the same army. They're not. They don't appeal in this. They've got different appeals to different people. So but yeah, it's Yeah.
Oh, this fighting
Oh,
talk. What is it about Wifrid dwarfs that you find so good? They've always left me cold.
You must be an elf.
Yeah, he does like elves, right?
Sounds like
What
it.
is even wrong with him?
Well,
It
I
sounds
don't.
like knife-ear talk.
Yeah. What did I don't know. I like. Well, the army. We start with the army, right? So when 4th edition came out and the Empire came out, I started collecting an Empire army. And I had quite a lot because there was a lot of new models came out for and stuff. And you could have a contingent of dwarfs. So I had a regiment of dwarfs in my Empire army, and then I realised I liked the dwarfs more than the rest of the army. and just like, and I suspect there's no small amount of that is due to the Tolkien-esque dwarfs and the Hobbit and Moria and all that kind of stuff. And that's that's part of one of I love the scenes in Moria. Just in the book, are just about one of my favourite bits of the whole Lord of the Rings, and this whole kind of failed splendor, and they took it from us, and all that, and the goblins took it all from us, kind of thing, but also just they're all just rock, but each of them's just hard as nails, and all the rest of it, and they're not elves. That's the whole point. It's like, again, in the Tolkien context, they were a bit of a second-hand race, really, because he loved his elves, was off his own bum about elves and all the rest, and it's like, and I love elves as well, actually, really, but dwarfs are more down to earth. They're literally more down to earth there, and particularly the iteration in Warhammer, which is like part Scottish, part Yorkshire Minor, just that bit of it. Just and then some, and then say they've got like gyrocopters and cannons and flame cannons and stuff is even better. So yeah, that's what that, and so that blend of Norse, the mythology that kind of Tolkien drew on, and that real world kind of just grumpiness, I think.
I like it. Faded grandeur, stubbornness, and stoicism in the face of a long decline. What's not to like?
Yes, yeah. That the weird thing. Do you know what it is? Not to get too political or kind of deep about it, but the elves, you see, because the elves again are all like British Empire, blah blah, colonialism, all the rest of it. So, and for me, dwarfs are kind of like the good traditionalist bit. They're not harking back to like when we used to rule the world in quite the same way. They're not that we want to recreate the 50s, but they are it used to be a bit better. There's a little bit element of them, but much more of a cozy slippers in the shed kind of way than so yeah, that's literally how Rick described dwarfs. Actually, really was like old man in their shed, which is why they're just not that interested in sex and things like that. They're just like dwarfs are just like they want to tinker with their
Just down at the allotment.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got time for basically one more question. Okay. Gav, will you be doing anything with the new Old World coming from Games Workshop?
Will I be doing anything? Well, I'm not scheduled to. I've not been approached to. I've no idea what their time frame is. I don't know if Black Library will plan to go back and write novels in it, if it's reappearing or anything like that. So no is the answer at the moment. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing what they're doing. We've got some hints of it via Total War and stuff like that as well. They're doing some cool stuff. But yeah, I mean, I Games Workshop doesn't use outside people for that kind of work. It's like they have very extensive design studios and teams and artists and whatever else. So it's like there isn't particularly any reason other than ego why I should think they should. I don't do that anymore, basically. So why would they call me?
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute delight. I'm sure Andy and Mark will agree with me.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you on, man.
So great to see you guys.
So remember, there's 1 week left to get Mother Hoarfrost if you sign up for our Patreon. And I'll just pop that up there. Remember to go and check out Gav's Patreon and also come and join us on Discord. Next week, we're going to be joined by Hannah Rose to talk about creating Tal'Dorei Reborn. So that should be really, really good. Really looking forward to that. And until then, please remember to like, subscribe, share on YouTube. And of course, thank you to all our patrons, but especially our newest patron, our Golden Rook, Bastian, who joined us this week. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark, for inserting the tugging of the forelock. And with that, I bid you a good evening, a good day, a good night, wherever you are, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Inside the Rookery. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.